Traces of light seep out from the dark earth, hidden for centuries from the day. Stone and wood, iron and gold, silver for the gods.
In the kind of popular view of the Vikings, they're always associated with loot and plunder and its product, treasure.
Serpents and spirals, dragons and wolves, amulets and rings.
It's classic Viking material, and it's everywhere the Vikings went.
A story of trading and travel, of raiding and theft.
It's a road trip, and the purpose is to come back richer than you went away.
The beauty of an age now past, hoarded in the earth, known only to the gods. The treasure of the Vikings. From the late 8th to the mid-11th centuries, the Scandinavian peoples burst from their frontiers almost wherever the seas could take them. Through archaeology, now we can explore the world of Viking life by understanding the realm of the Viking dead. The story of Viking treasure is the story of the Vikings themselves. The richness of imagery and the wonders left to us now. For some, it reflects the voyages and adventure, the romance of a period that fascinates us. For archaeologists, Viking treasure is more broadly defined, beyond fine things alone. Life was short and often violent, yet it was not without its beauty. The sagas convey to us echoes of the Viking Age, tales of heroes and the battles they fought to win great fame, and most of all, treasure. Yet the sagas were written many years after the Vikings lived.
One of the problems about understanding the Scandinavian point of view at this time is that, of course, the Scandinavians are not writing things down. They're making runic inscriptions, but these are more or less kind of epitaphs on monuments to the dead and so on. They don't give us a lot of information, especially not in this early period, in the 700s and into the early 800s.
If there ever was any contemporary Scandinavian literature, it's now gone. But many physical clues about their society remain. Archaeologist Tim Sutherland has worked on Viking sites. He's in Nottingham to see a special exhibition of artifacts from around the British Isles, reflecting this extraordinary period. The Viking Age is distinct in its visual record, its art.
One of the interesting things about the Viking period is the artwork. It's so distinctive. It's beautiful to look at, and it also seems to appear out of nowhere and then becomes very classic Viking in style.
The imagery is clearly defined and instantly recognizable. It's related to, yet different, to Anglo-Saxon or other European Christian art. There are several styles of decoration. There are animals and mythic beasts, wolves, ravens, and always serpents and dragons.
A lot of it's made out of very basic materials as well. I mean, there's metals and there's stone, but there's things like walrus ivory and wood. And so it almost looks as though they've been trying to make things out of everything. It's almost as if they couldn't help themselves and produce artwork. And of course, it seems to get better and better until it's classic Viking material, and it's everywhere the Vikings went.
Probably most of the physical manifestations of Viking art have not survived. Artifacts, perishable by time and the earth. Apart from aberrations like the Oseberg grave, they mostly don't survive in the ground. The Western Viking Age lasted barely 300 years. But the archaeology from the time is distinct. The physical artifacts above all else define in our minds the Scandinavian peoples who made, wore, traded and looted them. They're made of stone, of metal. Iron and steel degrade, precious metals less so. Bronze, gold, silver. But what do we mean by treasure? What did the Vikings do with it? And the treasure itself, over the years of the Viking period, how did that change? Scandinavian society had existed relatively peacefully beyond the frontiers of Western Europe for centuries. But then, in 793 AD, with the attack on Lindisfarne, the raiding began. Over the following centuries, incalculable amounts of valuable items and materials were migrated from the British Isles and all over Europe to Scandinavia. But what were the Vikings looking for in those first raids?
I think in the early part of the Viking Age, the kind of literal loot that Scandinavians are taking and bringing home with them is mainly, frankly, anything they can carry that appears to be of value, especially anything made of precious metals.
From the early decades of raiding, very little has survived.
We find some of this material recycled. We find coins made into pendants, things like that. They're certainly not after money in the way that we understand it. Scandinavia was not a coin economy in the early Viking Age. I think the bulk of the stuff that's coming in from the raids is probably melted down and then recast into new forms more to Scandinavian taste.
So how can we understand exactly what treasures the Vikings were after when they attacked Lindisfarne? The raid sent shockwaves through history, and we imagine it to have been catastrophic given the Saxon accounts. Yet it might not have been that devastating. It seems the Vikings didn't get everything they were looking for. Archaeologist and writer Max Adams picks up the trail. Lindisfarne's priory was well known across Christian Europe, and also throughout the rest of Northumberland were other respected priories and famous Saxon monks. Lindisfarne itself is forever linked with Saint Cuthbert. His remains today lie in Durham Cathedral. In 793, they lay enshrined in Lindisfarne Priory when the Vikings attacked. Despite their plundering, Cuthbert's body survived, and with it, perhaps the greatest treasure, at least we know of, that the Vikings never stole.
This extraordinary, exquisite little object, no more than 2.5 inches across, is Cuthbert's personal possession, his pectoral cross worn about his neck on a chain. And its remarkable survival to this day is due, part coincidence, part just good luck, I suppose, to the fact that it was wrapped beneath several layers of shroud, and it wasn't found until the 1830s when it was finally opened and the shroud was unwrapped. And it is a remarkable, unique survival of 7th century craftsmanship and of Cuthbert's own personal physical presence in the world.
The shrine of Saint Cuthbert was well known, and it's hard to think that the Vikings didn't seek it out as they ransacked Lindisfarne. We can't be sure now if the monks had time to hide the body.
Whatever the first Viking raid did, they didn't steal or defile the shrine of Cuthbert. And that's worth contemplating, that for all the destruction the Vikings wreaked, they didn't get at Cuthbert's coffin, whether that was because they were scared or because it was in a plain wooden casket and didn't look very interesting, or didn't look as if it had any treasure in it. But it did have this treasure in it, and they didn't get it.
St. Cuthbert's cross now serves as a reminder of what lured the Scandinavians to the British Isles. The bait for the beginning of an age of raiding.
Over time, the raids start to accelerate, and at that point, clearly, when, as they say, nothing succeeds like success. If you happen to know that Olaf in the next valley has suddenly got some nice shiny new brooches, or is melting them down and making silver things, you start to wonder when you're there, shoveling the dung pile or whatever.
What can we learn about the treasure that we know the Vikings did capture and take home with them to Scandinavia? The Museum of Cultural History in Oslo houses the greatest collection of Viking treasures in Norway, perhaps all of Scandinavia. Much of it is jewellery, for personal adornment, the power of display.
From the Viking Age, people are drawn to, and researchers are drawn to gold, silver, coins, jewellery.
Archaeologist Hannah Louise Annestadt is here to show Tim around this incredible collection of Viking treasures.
So, welcome to our treasure room at the Museum of Cultural History.
Oh, yeah. More than a bit of gold and silver around them.
Absolutely, and we like to show them off, of course.
Yeah, it looks fantastic.
So we just collected all the really important objects and put them into one room, and it gives a certain effect.
We often think of Vikings as big, roughy, tufty men, but this is really fine material. It's really artistically fine as well. It's not sort of big and sort of lumpy. It's incredibly delicate. I mean, that's one thing that sticks out. And these are really beautiful, not just because they're made of gold and silver, but because they're actually beautiful works of art as well.
Absolutely. They used a lot of energy to make these things, to wear them, to look good. Obviously,
yeah,
it's
certainly, and it does as well. It works, obviously,
it works,
because it's gold and silver, and it looks good anyway because of the artistic workmanship that's gone into it. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Tim's interested to see fragments that remain from the earliest raids of the Viking Age. Artifacts from this period are rare. It was just a few years or decades when Scandinavian raiding began and quickly escalated. The rewards were there, it seems, for those who dared. Now we can only guess at exactly why the raids began when they did.
Vast amounts of treasure from the British Isles end up in Scandinavia. Some of it's lost, some of it's hidden and then never recovered, some of it's buried in graves. What are they actually thinking they're going to do with that money? I think first thing on their mind is they're going to buy themselves a wife. In other words, now they've got cash, they can afford to proposition a woman they've got pretty good idea which girl they're going to proposition. And with ready cash, which girl's father is going to refuse them.
And perhaps some of that ready cash is right here. Some of these pieces are examples of the very first treasures from the Viking period.
What's really amazing about this is the primary loot. This is the primary things that was taken or traded from northern England at the very beginning of the Viking period. And it's the classic stuff, but it's also parts of it look like they've actually been hacked up, like the cross, maybe off the front of a book or something.
There's no way to know exactly where they came from, but the religious imagery on some of them suggests it's at least possible they came from churches or monasteries in Britain, Northumbria, even Lindisfarne itself.
It looks like it's the corner piece of a gospel book, and these were very specific and very identifiable, and sometimes they had a nice jewel in the corner, and that almost looks like it had a jewel in that little corner piece there. But it's all the swirls and all the artistic work that we see in very common usage in the Anglo-Saxon period, like the brooch underneath. You can actually see it being ripped apart and used as basically loot for dividing up and saying, yeah, that's your bit. So you could pull items apart. All the gospel books would have had the facades written off, all the nice jewellery ripped off the front and then divided up amongst themselves. It's fantastic stuff. To be able to see it here is great.
There's evidence that in this early period, items like this were worn as jewellery, even those that had been quite crudely cut up, as if they were shares of plunder. They were almost all excavated from female graves. This raided treasure was just about always found on the upper chest of the body, often between the two traditional Scandinavian turtle brooches worn by many women. These wives, mothers, sisters or daughters went to the afterlife wearing treasure that they knew was from across the seas, that had been won for them by their loved ones.
It's about status, it's about prestige, it's probably about gift giving. These objects come from a long way, from a long distance. And this is a society extremely focused on prestige and honor. And the chieftain had to get that honor from somewhere. And it wasn't just the gold, it was also the fact that he had, or they had traveled abroad, maybe fought for these objects, won a battle, and then come back. It's really materialized prestige and honor.
As the 9th century wore on, artifacts like these became more rare in Scandinavian graves. The Viking Age had only just begun, but things were changing.
Of course, as the decades go on, the pickings get much thinner. People are a little bit more wary. Monks move inland. It's, you know, the first wave of is too good to be true. Then after that, I think it gets a bit thinner.
Raiding had probably been small scale at first, but now it had expanded to a different level.
You have to think about, how did the raids actually get organised? Who owned the ships? Who equipped the people on them? Do people bring their own weapons? Do they get provided with them? Are raids sponsored by people who don't actually go on them at all? Are there raids by commission? Now, what I'd really like is one of those, not so much of these next time, okay? We don't know, but we certainly see enormous amounts of material filtering back into Scandinavia.
As the treasure flowed in, the Viking world itself was transitioning fast.
But as the raids go on, as they escalate, the proceeds of those actions are more fed into the economy in a formalised way. And this is when we start to find silver bullion, hack silver, where finished objects like arm rings or whatever are cut into pieces and quite clearly used for their weight, their value, rather than their aesthetic qualities.
Jewellery and prestige items seem to take second place now to sheer amounts of material collected in hoards.
One of the things we associate with the Viking period is the hoard. And it's not just one or two. There are hundreds of them. And some of them are quite small and quite distinctive, almost certainly personal, but some of them are absolutely massive. And the number of them is astounding. I mean, they're all over the Viking world.
Hoards aren't exclusive to the Vikings. They've been found from Roman, Anglo-Saxon and other times. But from the 8th century, they seem to flourish in the archaeological record. Viking hoards have been found across Western Europe and as far away as Iceland. They often contain gold and copper alloy or bronze. But most of all, they reflect the Scandinavians' apparent favourite material.
The hoards contain things like coins, but a lot of them also contain very beautiful pieces of art. And you could argue that some of this was left intact because they appreciated its value. It's not just the silver content, it's the value of the artifact itself, and they wanted to retain it.
In the decades and centuries after the Lindisfarne raid, the Vikings went from raiders and invaders to settlers. As with every other place they journeyed, so too did their treasure hoards. And the British Isles were no exception. Lakeside Arts in Nottingham is the current home of a travelling exhibition which features some of the greatest hoards found in Britain.
This is a fantastic exhibition because what they've done is they've brought together a large collection of hoards from around Britain. Also, some of the most important hoards, some of the big ones from various parts of the British Isles.
But they don't all at first look like treasure.
It is almost like a collection of material that you see in a hospital that the kids have swallowed. I mean, there's such a variety of bits and pieces, and they're quite small as well. The majority of them are things you could carry around with you in your purse. They do seem to like their well-defined small pieces of silver, or something that can crumple into a small piece of silver.
it's clear that the material itself is often what's being valued, rather than the form of the item.
So you've got the ingots, and then you've got the coins, but you've also got obviously things that have been chopped from bigger pieces. And whether that's to make it more portable or whether that's something so you could distribute it between your friends or use it as the equivalent of a coin or a method of payment.
Over the decades, the composition of Viking hoards changed. From what appear like random odds and ends, more and more hack silver appears, as it seems to become more about commodity. This change is also evident in the hoards found in the Vikings' homelands.
We see it in the economical transformation in the hoards, where you get the bullion, the smaller pieces, the coins, the use of precious metal and especially silver as payment. So it's kind of an economical transformation that draws Scandinavia closer to the international trade networks, both in the east and in the west. So what you consider to be valuable changes in this period.
Precious metal as payment was all that mattered now. But when it came to this need for bullion, the precious metal which appears most in Viking treasure hoards is silver.
We know they had a particular affinity for silver. It occurs again and again in their material culture, in their jewellery and so on. They like gold as well, but silver is the metal they can get access to.
Silver seems to have been universally used across Scandinavia for trading, with regions beyond their frontiers. But how did this trade develop? It seems the foundations had been there a long time. To the east of Scandinavia, the Baltic region in Viking times is relatively unknown. Again, written records are virtually non-existent. But archaeology is now revealing glimpses of very early Scandinavian activity here.
There has traditionally been a sense that the Viking Age, the time of the Vikings, begins in the west with the raids. But actually these connections out into the world have been in existence for centuries before the Viking Age. Even the great trade routes down to the Black Sea, to Constantinople, what's now Istanbul, and even way into the east, into the Asian steppes, linking up with the caravan routes, even as far east as China.
Tallinn, Estonia's capital. It's one of the best preserved medieval cities in Northern Europe. The towers left today are later, but the city itself dates back to Viking times. In the Middle Ages, it was an important member of the Hanseatic League, but its importance for trade dated back to at least Viking times, and probably before. Tallinn was a gateway to the sea routes east, to Russia, also north to Finland, and south towards the distant region of the Black Sea and the Golden City of Byzantium. And there's evidence of these far-flung connections here in Tallinn today. One of Tallinn's medieval fortifications, called Fat Margaret Tower, is home to Estonia's Maritime Museum. An exhibition here also brings together many treasure hoards from the Viking period. But there's a difference about what makes up most of these hoards.
As the Viking Age goes on, you start to see this enormous trade in silver coming in from the Arab world to the east. So you have these coin hoards all over Scandinavia.
Coins of silver and also gold in huge quantities, and from far beyond the frontiers of Viking society.
It's staggering. If you look at this silver, there's all different types from all around the world, and basically you can see the quality of it. It looks like it was made yesterday, or it almost looks fake. It's so pristine, and that's amazing. That's what's amazing about this museum, is that there's coins from all over the place from different periods, all throughout the Viking periods, and it's got all different types of hoards as well. There's private small hoards, or there's group hoards where it's obviously more than one person's wealth.
They range back in date to late Roman times and are from all over Scandinavia and Europe. But by far the most are from much further east.
Some of the coins are dirhams from the Middle East, which are very specific coins. I mean, you can tell how far they've come, and others are, from various other parts of the world. And it shows the extent that the Vikings were trading. One of the nice things you can see here are the details on the coins themselves. I mean, you actually see the inscriptions, how they were made, when they were made. They would have had the name of the ruler on them as well. And so you can quite often easily date them.
Some of the dirhams look more like coins from the 19th century rather than the 9th.
I mean, just look at these. These are amazing. Minted over 1,000 years ago, and yet they almost look fake. They almost look brand new.
It didn't matter that they were foreign coins. The Vikings only cared about the metal itself.
Vikings, of course, the Scandinavians, most of them carried little balances. They were very, very careful in weighing treasure by weight, scrap metal.
It's nice to see the scales here, because that's what's important about this silver. It's not the denomination of the coins, it's the weight and purity of the silver. So if you know the purity, then of course all you've got to do is chop up your silver into exactly the right amount of weight.
And remember that what we see in the archaeology is a tiny, tiny fraction of what was originally there. Most of it has probably been melted down over and over again and has been recycled, out of the Viking Age.
Neither silver nor gold occur naturally in Scandinavia. They raided Britain and Western Europe for it. But when it came to quantity and purity, the eastern supplies were incomparable. But how did this amount of silver travel the vast distances from Arabia? The inland areas of Estonia and northern Europe were wildernesses. But the Vikings were experts in mobility. Just a short drive south of Tallinn, Viking is a reconstructed Viking village. There's a highway from Tallinn now, but in the Viking Age, the road wouldn't have been the best way to travel here.
Rivers like this have hardly changed since the Viking times. There were no real main roads. There's very little in the way of progress through the country, and these are the equivalent of the motorways of their day. You get people coming up and down, using the rivers to get in and out of the country, bringing in the trade goods, and also taking out goods like the timber or whatever that was valuable from the country that could be taken out of the country as well.
As the Vikings travelled further afield, it was second nature for them to use rivers to travel inland, and their boats were well suited to it.
The shallow draft boats would have been absolutely ideal, because some of these rivers are literally about 1/2 metre deep or something, and the ships were perfect for actually skimming over the surface right up into the heartland itself.
The river networks ran for hundreds of miles through the vast North European forests. To journey them was perhaps as long and was maybe at times as arduous as crossing the Baltic or the North Sea.
Viking boatmen would have probably never even seen the sea. A lot of them were actually born and bred and used the boats inland, and it was very rarely that anybody would have got out and gone across the sea.
Rivers like this were the real key to the expansion of Viking trade. Archaeologists in Estonia are now mapping the silver routes, showing this incredible international network, not just in the Baltic, but for hundreds of miles to the north, south, and east.
We think of the Vikings as people who have stolen wealth and taken it back home. What this evidence shows us here is the extensive trade networks around the world. And these people are bartering, buying, selling, not just stealing it, they're actually using commerce as we see today. And that's the information that we're getting from all this.
And nowhere has there been found more treasure than on a single island in the Baltic Sea.
One thing that's absolutely clear from every aspect of the archaeological record is that the island of Gotland is in some senses a separate place, a distinctive culture.
Gotland lies almost at the centre of the Baltic seaways, and this must have influenced life on the island virtually since sailing began. The Viking Age in Gotland lasted longer than almost anywhere else in Scandinavia or Europe. And the people of those times certainly left their mark here.
One of the things that is most apparent when you start looking at the archaeology of Gotland in the Viking Age is the silver. There are so many hoards, buried deposits of silver on Gotland, that if we make a distribution map of the Viking silver hoards of the Baltic, Gotland is kind of black because there's no space between the dots.
There's at least one silver hoard found in Gotland every single year, more than anywhere else in the Viking world.
It's absolutely astonishing. There are some parts of the island where absolutely literally every farm has a silver hoard. So they're not just trading in silver, they're doing different things with it than the rest of Scandinavia. The big question is why?
Archaeologist Per Widerström has excavated many hoards on Gotland.
People in general, I think of history on Gotland, and it's an island, it's an isolated place packed with history.
There's lots of evidence for trade in Gotland going back to the Stone Age. But with the Vikings, it reached a different level. There was a strong culture here, and this shows in the archaeology.
During the Viking Age, something else happens, and we can see that there are large amounts of especially silver coming in here, and we can also see that the jewelry on the Swedish mainland are very similar from north to south, but on Gotland is something completely different. So it's really important for the Gotlanders to stand out from the rest.
Per is one of a small team of archaeologists on the island, whose task it is to investigate every new treasure hoard. In July 1999, when another hoard was unearthed, no one was too surprised.
At first it was another hoard, but then we realized that this is something different and something else.
Even today, it stands out in the archaeology of the Viking Age. It had come to light in the northeast of Gotland, on a farm called Spillings.
The discovery of the Spillings Hoard, the largest Viking silver hoard ever found, not just on Gotland but anywhere, is one of those amazing moments.
Metal detectorists working with Gotland's museum were routinely surveying a field where the landowner had over the years found dozens of silver coins.
The landowner at Spillings, he's very interested in the Viking Age, and he said that you need to go over this piece of land. There is something here, I'm sure.
At first it seemed that all there was in the field were rocks, and they were on the verge of giving up.
It took us a while, and then one of the museum metal detectorists went there and got his bright signal, and that started it all, actually.
The detector signal went off the scale. They found not one, but 3 deposits of metal buried in the shallow soil a few meters apart. It was clearly a big find.
I think we realized quite fast that this was something different, but not how different.
The fragile finds had to be carefully recovered, and quickly. Many visitors flocked to the site. Each cache was cast in plaster and then lifted as a whole, in the hope of preserving valuable clues about how they'd been placed in the ground.
When we excavate silver hoards, we'd like to keep them as intact as possible. We'd like to see if they've been if people have been taking things from them, or if there's been things added, and as there are lots of coins in them, sometimes we can see that there's a gap for 20 years, and then they start refilling them again. So that's what we want to do. So therefore we put them in plaster and we take them indoors and excavate them in a laboratory.
Each individual piece had to be separated, cleaned and conserved. It was to be more than 2 years before the team would begin to know the full picture. Most hoards are chance finds and are often dug up before the archaeologists even hear about them. But at Spillings, Per had an opportunity to do a proper excavation and investigate the burying of the hoard. They set to digging in the stony field.
While we were excavating there one day, this old lady came to us, and she was really interested in what we were doing, because she told us that her husband used to farm this land, and she said that on this spot where we were now, he was very annoyed all the time because he got steel wire tangled into the harvester, and he took it out and he put it on a big pile of stone, and that pile of stone was now later taken away. And we excavated this and found all these like almost purple looking threads, and we realized later that was silver. That was silver threads and silver jewelry that's been dragged out.
Pierre and the team found out why the field was so stony. The hoard wasn't just buried in the middle of a field. Back in Viking times, there was a building here, and unusually it was partly stone, accounting for the rocks all round the area. It was 10 by 50 meters, huge by the standards of the time, probably with an upper floor. But there was no hearth, leading Pierre to speculate it was some kind of storage or warehouse. The hoard, in the 3 holes close together, had been beneath the floor of this building. The steel wire that snagged in the harvester was literally just the beginning. Spillings was clearly a spectacular find. Neck rings, arm rings, finger rings, bars, ingots, and other hack silver. One part of the hoard was bronze. By itself, just this amount of material was greater than many hoards found on Gotland. But what made the find truly unbelievable were the coins. In all, there were more than 14,000 of them. Altogether, it amounted to the largest hoard from the Viking period ever found. Not just in Gotland, but anywhere. It was truly unique.
Not so much of its size, because even though that's amazing, I mean, it's 67 kilos of silver and other metals, it's really because of the context of it. What does that hoard mean? What could it buy? I mean, what has happened for that amount of wealth, money, if you like, to be left in the ground and never recovered? Did whoever did that die and not tell anyone? If you know that Grandad buried sort of the tax burden of the island for 6 years somewhere in your property, I mean, would you not tear the walls down? You know, it's very strange. It's also hidden. It's inside buildings. You know, somebody's literally pried up the floorboards and buried this underneath in sacks.
The hoard is now displayed in Gotland's museum in Visby. After cleaning, the coins could be examined, and this revealed valuable information. Like those from Oslo and many other hoards in the Viking world, the origin of these coins was very distant from Scandinavia.
The majority of these coins are from the Middle East. We have some from Italy, some from Denmark, but like 99% are from the Middle East.
The coins carry the names of Arab caliphs, more than a millennium old. Some date back almost to the end of the Roman Empire, and one even carries an inscription to Moses. The geographical origins of many of them are all too familiar to us today.
The biggest minting town for this hoard is Baghdad. And they got silver from Afghanistan to make their coins, and we got it from there, or perhaps even from Russia or elsewhere, but that's where they were minted.
The Vikings didn't care whose ruler was on the coins. They just wanted the purest silver.
When we see these as bracelets, they were once coins, so the amount of coins that actually got here must have been huge, because they don't weigh much.
It's all evidence of the widely ranging trade routes from Scandinavia to the east. Raiding in Britain or Europe brought quick rewards for a few decades. But the basis for this influx of pure silver was trade. For Scandinavian goods, possibly most of all, human slaves. We're unlikely ever to know for sure. Only the silver itself now remains. We can only wonder as to why so many hoards came to be, and why so many of the Vikings consigned so much wealth in bronze, gold, and most of all in silver to the earth.
I think the traditional explanation for silver hoards, or any kinds of deposits of precious objects, has been a kind of primitive banking. It's the equivalent of stuffing your money under the mattress. But at the same time, we know that doesn't really work. I mean, is everybody on Gotland burying their money and then meeting an untimely end before they tell anybody? It's just absurd.
With vast numbers of hoards across the Viking world, more than 800 discovered so far in Gotland alone, there must be other explanations.
Perhaps they're marking property. I know that this is my land because my family have claimed it in physical ways over the decades and centuries.
The archaeology so far, at least, tells us hoards seem rarely taken from, just added to.
There are some farms that we can see that there are like one hoard for each generation within the same farm. So it must have been important for each generation to have its own like collection of silver. So they would have known that their father also had one, but they didn't take it up. Either they didn't find it or they didn't want to take it up for some kind of religious reasons.
And perhaps this was not necessarily in a way we would understand now.
Something I find fascinating is almost a kind of throwaway remark in a later text. It's the beginning of a saga of the Norwegian kings written by Snorri Sturluson.
Snorri Sturluson was an Icelandic scholar writing centuries after. Sagas like his are almost all we have to try to catch fleeting glimpses into the Viking mind.
He talks about a set of laws laid down by the god Odin as to proper behaviour, what you should do about burying the dead and so on. And one of these things says that anything a person buries in the ground in their lifetime will come back to them after death. So it may well be a kind of bank, but it might be a spiritual one. It means you get the checkbook when you reach the other side.
Odin's law is the only clue we have.
He says that you can bring to the next life what you put in the soil. And if that's the case, then you wouldn't take your father's hoard if he put it in the soil to gain it again in the next life. Then you would steal from your father and from the gods.